Her sleeve slipped as she set the cup on his desk, and for a heartbeat, Henry Barbaro forgot to breathe. Purple bruises, thin and finger-shaped, bloomed across Sarah's wrist like bruised flowers trying to heal in secret. She froze when she realized he'd seen them, her hand trembling as she pulled the sleeve back down. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back to hours before, where it all started. The silence in the room thickened, stretching between them like glass. Henry's gaze lingered for only a second, but in that second, he saw everything he needed to. Fear, shame, and something else, an exhaustion that went deeper than sleep could fix. It was 7:02 a.m. in Brooklyn. The city below was still half asleep, bathed in the gray light before sunrise. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse overlooking the East River, the skyline shimmered faintly, the world caught between night and day. Henry sat behind his desk, a stack of shipping ledgers spread open in front of him. Soft jazz played from the old record player in the corner, the saxophone smooth, deliberate. Numbers and codes filled the pages, shipments, routes, accounts that would bore most men to tears. But Henry wasn't most men. He noticed everything. The crack in a man's voice during negotiations. The shift in eye contact before a lie. The half-second hesitation when loyalty began to crumble. Those details had built him an empire, one quiet decision at a time. So when Sarah Antonio walked in that morning with her usual quiet grace, he noticed the details too. The way her shoulders hunched slightly inward, as if she was trying to occupy less space. The way her voice never rose above a whisper, careful, apologetic. She'd been working in his household for 3 months now, and she'd mastered the art of being invisible. But invisibility had its limits. And when her sleeve slipped, revealing those marks, Henry saw the truth no one else had dared to ask about. He watched her closely as she tried to steady her shaking hands. The coffee cup rattled softly against the saucer, betraying her nerves. "Sarah," he said quietly. She looked up, startled, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Yes, Mr. Barbaro." "Sit down." "Oh, I should finish dusting the—" "Sit." His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of authority that came from a lifetime of never repeating himself. She hesitated, then obeyed, lowering herself into the leather chair opposite his desk. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her apron. "What happened?" he asked. Her eyes darted to the window, to the floor, anywhere but him. "It's nothing, sir. I'm just clumsy." She forced a small laugh, brittle and hollow. It died almost immediately. Henry leaned back in his chair, studying her. She was young, maybe 27 or 28. Her skin was smooth, but her eyes carried the tiredness of someone twice her age. There was a quiet dignity in her, a strength trying hard not to break. But fear clung to her like a shadow. "Both wrists?" he asked softly, noting how her other hand was hidden under the table. Her face drained of color. "Please, sir, I don't want any trouble." "You already have trouble," Henry said. His voice was calm, almost kind, but his words were not a question. "The only thing I want to know is who brought it to my house." She swallowed hard. The seconds stretched. For a moment, it looked like she might tell him. But then she shook her head. "I really should get back to work," she said quickly, rising to her feet. "Sarah." She froze at the sound of her name, but didn't turn around. "If someone is hurting you," he continued, "that ends now." Her shoulders stiffened. Then she walked away without another word, her footsteps fading down the hall. Henry sat there for a long while, his gaze fixed on the door she'd closed behind her. The smell of coffee lingered in the air. He reached for the cup, took a slow sip, and set it down again. The bitterness sat heavy on his tongue. He had built his life on control, of men, of money, of silence. Brooklyn feared his name because he didn't act out of impulse. Every decision he made was deliberate, every move calculated. And because of that, when he decided something, it stayed decided. Someone had hurt the girl who worked under his roof. Someone had laid hands on her. For all his reputation, the blood, the power, and the fear his name inspired, Henry Barbaro lived by a code. There were rules he did not break. You didn't hurt children. You didn't betray loyalty. And you never, under any circumstance, hurt someone who couldn't fight back. He turned his chair toward the window. Outside, the early sun was beginning to paint streaks of gold across the city. Brooklyn looked peaceful from up here, almost beautiful. But Henry knew better. Beneath the skyline, there were things that crawled in the dark. Men who thought their badges made them gods. Men who broke others because no one ever broke them first. He thought of Sarah's trembling hands, her downcast eyes, the bruises shaped like fingers. No, she hadn't fallen. She hadn't bumped into a cabinet. Someone had grabbed her, hard enough to leave marks. And that someone was still walking free. Henry picked up his phone. "Marco," he said when the other end clicked alive. "Morning, boss," came the gruff voice of his fixer. "I need a background check." "Quiet one." "Who?" "Sarah Antonio. The maid." There was a pause. "What am I looking for?" "Everything. Where she lives, who she talks to, what her story is. And find out if she's got anyone giving her trouble." "Got it. You think she's in some kind of mess?" Henry's jaw tightened. "She's hiding bruises." "You tell me." Marco didn't ask anything else. He never did. "I'll call you by noon." Henry ended the call and leaned back in his chair again. The soft jazz had ended, replaced by the faint hum of the city waking up below. He poured himself another cup of coffee and stared at the surface as if it might hold answers. It didn't, but he already knew what he'd find. He'd seen this kind of fear before, in wives of businessmen who owed him money, in girls trafficked through the docks, in boys who'd run from cops and straight into his club begging for help. Fear was a language he understood better than most. He pressed a button on the intercom. "Mrs. Leone," he said. The housekeeper's voice crackled through. "Yes, Mr. Barbaro. Call Sarah back to the kitchen later. Make sure she eats something." "Yes, sir." "Is something wrong?" He hesitated. "Just keep an eye on her." After the line went dead, Henry turned again toward the window. The sun had risen higher now, streaking gold and orange over the bridge. From up here, the East River looked almost gentle. But underneath the calm surface, currents ran strong enough to pull a man under and never let him go. Something similar stirred inside him, quiet, unseen, and dangerous. He thought again of Sarah's bruised wrist, the way she'd flinched when he'd asked her what happened. She was scared of more than pain. She was scared of someone who still had power over her. And whoever that was had just made a mistake. Henry picked up the phone again, almost absently this time. His voice, when he spoke, was calm. "Marco," he said once more. "Make it fast." He hung up, then stood, walking to the window. The city looked smaller from here, a sprawl of buildings and lights, people rushing to work, pretending the world wasn't built on secrets. He'd spent 2 decades mastering that world. He didn't need to raise his voice or brandish a gun. His power was quiet, precise. When he decided someone was finished, they simply were. And now, someone had hurt a woman working in his home, in his protection. That someone just became his next problem. Outside, the Brooklyn skyline glowed gold, bright and indifferent. But inside Henry Barbaro's chest, something colder was rising, controlled, deliberate, and absolute. By the time the day ended, the world would still see Henry Barbaro as the same man he'd always been. Calm, ruthless, untouchable. Only he would know that somewhere deep inside the machinery of his empire, a new hunt had begun. The day after the Bruises, Henry Barbaro's world moved like clockwork, but his mind did not. From the outside, everything in the penthouse appeared the same. The jazz still played softly in the background. The morning paper still waited folded beside his espresso, and the skyline still shimmered in gold through the floor-to-ceiling windows. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The quiet calm had teeth now. Henry's investigation had begun. Marco was the first piece to move. Before dawn, he was already on the phone, calling in favors that never appeared on paper. Henry's orders were clear. Dig quietly, trace everything, leave no trail. By the time sunlight hit the East River, the gears of Henry's network were turning, discreet, unseen, efficient. Henry, meanwhile, started closer to home. He found Mrs. Leone in the kitchen, stirring sugar into her coffee. She had worked for him long enough to sense when he walked in. Without turning, she said, "You haven't eaten, Mr. Barbaro." "Tell me about Sarah Antonio," he said. The spoon paused mid-stir. Mrs. Leone turned slowly. "What about her?" "She's hiding something." "I need to know what." The older woman sighed, setting the cup down. "She's polite, works hard, keeps to herself, barely speaks unless I speak first. The kind of person you wish you had more of. And she's scared," Mrs. Leone said quietly. "I've seen it before. That kind of fear doesn't come from strangers." Henry nodded once. "Does she live alone?" "No. She told me she's staying with her sister in the Bronx. Small place near Fordham Road, I think. Said she moved there after her divorce." "Divorce." Henry repeated the word as though tasting it. "What do you know about her ex-husband?" "Nothing. She never talks about him. But once when she burned her hand on the stove, I asked if she wanted me to call him, maybe out of habit, and she froze. Didn't say a word, just kept her eyes on the floor." Henry absorbed that in silence. Then, almost absently, he said, "If she ever looks that way again, you call me first." Mrs. Leone nodded. "I'll keep watch." Later that day, as the house filled with the sound of work, footsteps, dishes, muted conversation, Henry found himself observing Sarah from the periphery. She moved like a shadow, quiet and deliberate, never meeting his eyes. When someone dropped a plate, she flinched. When Mrs. Leone called her name unexpectedly, she startled as if struck. She avoided mirrors entirely, cleaning around them without ever glancing at her reflection. The more Henry watched, the more convinced he became that her fear wasn't just memory, it was ongoing. Someone still had their hand around her life, even if they weren't physically there. That evening, as twilight bled into the skyline, Henry's phone buzzed. "Talk," he said, answering without preamble. Marco's voice came through low and rough. "You were right. Sarah Antonio, 28, formerly married to Detective Ethan Walker of the NYPD. Divorce finalized 6 months ago. He's got friends upstairs, internal affairs, a deputy chief, even a councilman who owes him favors. That's probably how he kept his record clean." Henry's eyes darkened. Kept it clean from what? Complaints. 3 domestic disturbances filed under her name. All closed the same day they were opened. Neighbors called the cops twice, said they heard shouting and glass breaking. She never pressed charges. Probably didn't think it'd go anywhere, considering who he is. Henry rose from his desk and walked to the window. Below him, the city glowed in fragments of light. Towers, headlights, a restless sea of motion. "You said he's a detective?" "Homicide, out of the 44th precinct. Decorated. 2 commendations for bravery, 1 for community service. Looks good on paper, but he's got a temper. Word is he's broken a few noses in bars off duty. Keeps company with some shady officers who take bribes from dealers. There's a pattern if you know where to look." Henry's hand tightened slightly on the phone. "And the money?" "Clean enough not to get caught. But his bank records show deposits that don't match his salary. Cash transactions, offshore accounts, property in someone else's name. The usual. Find the source," Henry said, "and dig deeper into the wife." Marco hesitated. "Boss, what are you thinking? That someone with a badge thinks he's untouchable. I intend to remind him he's not." Henry hung up. The information didn't surprise him, but it ignited something steady and cold inside him. Violence was easy. Revenge was easy. What Henry preferred was precision, the kind that cut quietly and left no fingerprints. While he planned his next step, the narrative shifted elsewhere, to Sarah. That night, as she walked home through the Bronx streets, Sarah kept her head down. The air smelled faintly of rain and exhaust. Neon signs buzzed overhead, flickering in broken rhythm. Her sister's apartment was small but clean, a 1-bedroom that always smelled of lavender and bleach. Sarah slipped inside, quietly, so she wouldn't wake her niece, who slept on the couch. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. The bruises were fading now, but their memory burned fresh. In her mind, she was back in her old apartment, the night everything changed. Ethan's voice had filled the walls like thunder, his anger turning the air heavy. "You embarrass me, Sarah. You think you can walk out while I'm talking?" She had stood near the counter, hands trembling as she tried to explain that she'd only gone to visit her sister. He'd slammed his fist against the cabinet beside her head. The sound made her jump. "You make me look like a fool," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You forget who I am." She had learned not to answer. When she didn't, he grabbed her wrists. His fingers pressed hard enough to leave the same purple stains she now covered every morning. "Say you're sorry." "I'm sorry," she whispered. Louder. "I'm sorry." Then he let go, straightened his uniform, and said it like a promise. "Don't ever make me do that again." In the weeks that followed, she filed for divorce. But Ethan Walker wasn't the kind of man who let go easily. He followed her once to work, once to her sister's place. Never said a word, just stood near his car, watching. The message was clear. He didn't need to hit her to remind her what he could do. A siren wailed somewhere outside, pulling her back to the present. Sarah took a deep breath and pressed her palms together to stop them from shaking. She didn't know it yet, but her quiet world was already changing. Henry Barbaro had seen enough, and he was not the type of man to ignore Bruises. That evening, back in the penthouse, Henry stood at the balcony overlooking the city lights. Sarah was inside, quietly cleaning the dining room. He watched her from a distance, the careful way she moved, the silence she carried like armor. To most people, she would seem invisible, but Henry saw her clearly now. "She thinks she's invisible," he murmured to himself. Not anymore. Henry Barbaro had learned patience long before he learned power. He knew how to wait for the right moment, how to let silence do the talking. But patience was not the same as stillness. Beneath his calm exterior, things were always moving, gears turning, people working, information flowing. Now, that movement had new direction. Ethan Walker. The name had already become a quiet storm inside Henry's empire. Marco had set his people digging, and by the following morning, Nico was in his office, a wiry man in his 30s who looked more like a sleep-deprived grad student than one of the best hackers in the city. His laptop sat open on the desk, screens reflecting off the glass walls as lines of data scrolled endlessly. "Walk me through it," Henry said. Nico rubbed his eyes and turned the screen. "Your detective friend's been busy. Multiple bank accounts, all under his name. Regular NYPD paycheck goes into one. But there are 3 others, offshore, unregistered. They're not huge accounts, but the deposits come in steady. 5 grand here, 10 grand there. Always cash. From where? Some tied back to shell companies that don't exist. A few linked to wire transfers from known narcotics distributors. My guess? Bribes, protection money, or payoffs for evidence tampering." Henry said nothing, his expression unreadable. "That's not all," Nico continued. "He's got gambling debts. Atlantic City mostly. Poker tables. A few big hits, mostly losses. Keeps him desperate. I also found internal complaints, assault, misconduct, harassment, all buried. Either dismissed by internal affairs or erased entirely. Somebody upstairs is keeping his record clean." Henry nodded once. "Names?" "2 recurring ones. Deputy Chief Donovan and Councilman Heller. Both have reasons to protect him. Heller's nephew got out of a gun charge last year. Walker was the arresting officer. You can connect the dots." Henry turned toward the window, the skyline of Brooklyn glinting like steel. "Good work, Nico. Keep digging. I want proof that sticks." Nico hesitated. "Boss, you want me to leak anything yet?" "Not yet," Henry said quietly. "We don't ruin him fast. We ruin him properly." Nico packed up without another word. He knew that tone. When Henry spoke like that, someone's world was about to collapse. By the end of the day, the penthouse had fallen into its usual rhythm again, except Sarah moved through it differently now. She could feel Henry watching her, not in the way men sometimes watched women, but in a way that made her nervous all the same. His silence carried weight, and she misread it as judgment. Each time she passed by his office, her pulse quickened. She thought maybe he regretted hiring her. Maybe she'd somehow done something wrong. That afternoon, while polishing the kitchen counter, Sarah caught Mrs. Leone watching her too. The older woman's eyes were kind, but Sarah still felt exposed. She muttered an excuse about taking the trash out just to get away. She thought about quitting. The idea had been sitting in the back of her mind all morning, whispering louder as the hours passed. Henry Barbaro was powerful, dangerous even, and if Ethan ever found out where she worked, there would be trouble. She didn't want to bring her chaos into someone else's house, especially not his. But when she stepped outside onto the service balcony, the cold air hit her and reality sank in. She needed this job. Her sister's rent, her niece's school supplies, everything depended on her weekly pay. Quitting wasn't an option. She could only pray Henry's watchful eyes would eventually turn elsewhere. That evening, Henry found her in the kitchen alone. The rest of the staff had gone home. She was wiping down the marble counters, shoulders tense, lost in thought. "You missed a spot," he said, his tone almost teasing. Sarah jumped slightly and turned, eyes wide. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize you were." "It's fine," he interrupted gently. "You've done enough for today." She hesitated, clutching the towel. "I just like to keep busy." Henry leaned against the doorway, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. "That's not always a good thing. Some people stay busy so they don't have to think." She looked down. "Maybe I'm one of those people." He nodded, crossing the room slowly. "You've been working here 3 months. You do your job well. You don't complain, but you act like you're waiting for something bad to happen." Her lips trembled slightly. "Old habits," she said quietly. "Habits can be broken." The room fell silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Sarah's grip on the towel tightened. She didn't want to cry, but emotion cracked through anyway. "I don't mean to cause trouble," she whispered. "I really don't." "You haven't," Henry said. She looked up, searching his face for anger, but finding only calm. For the first time, she saw something almost human in his expression. Not pity, but understanding. "If anyone ever tries to hurt you again," he said, "they won't succeed." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "You don't even know who." "I don't need to." She shook her head, wiping her face quickly. "You don't understand. He's a cop. He has friends everywhere. You can't." Henry's voice softened. "You don't need to tell me his name." She froze. "How did you?" "I notice things," he said. "It's what I do." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Sarah took a slow breath and nodded, gathering her composure. "Thank you, Mr. Barbaro," she said finally. "But please don't get involved. It'll only make things worse." She left before he could answer, disappearing down the hall with her quiet steps. Henry stood there, watching the space she'd left behind. Then he muttered to himself, "She doesn't need to tell me. I already know." He picked up his phone. "Marco," he said when the line connected. "Put a tail on Ethan Walker. I want eyes on him 24 hours. Discreet. I don't care what it costs." "Understood," Marco replied. By nightfall, Henry's order was already in motion. 2 cars, 3 men, 1 objective: track Ethan's movements, learn his patterns, stay invisible. Hours later, the first footage arrived. Marco sent it directly to Henry's private monitor. The video showed a grainy view of a quiet Bronx street. Sarah's bus had just pulled away from the stop. A few cars passed, headlights slicing through the dark. Then, from the corner, an unmarked sedan rolled into frame, silver, with a small dent on the front fender. It idled for several seconds, then pulled out slowly, following the route the bus had taken. Henry leaned closer. The license plate was half visible, but he didn't need the full number. Marco's men had already confirmed it belonged to Detective Ethan Walker. For several minutes, Henry said nothing. He just watched the loop replay, the car tailing the bus again and again. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "Keep recording. Don't intervene yet." "Boss, he's following her." "I know," Henry said. "Let him dig his own grave." He ended the call and stared out the window at the dark city stretching below. Brooklyn glittered under 1,000 lights, but none of them reached the shadows where men like Ethan Walker lived. Henry poured himself a drink, watching the ice melt slowly. His fury stayed quiet, controlled, but behind his calm eyes, a storm was gathering. Soon, Ethan would learn the one rule every man in Brooklyn eventually did. No one laid a hand on what belonged to Henry Barbaro. By the next morning, the city had returned to its rhythm. Traffic, sirens, distant chatter, but Henry Barbaro's world had narrowed to one name: Ethan Walker. The footage of that unmarked car, tailing Sarah's bus, still played in his mind. The steady crawl of it behind her route wasn't random. It was ritual, the mark of a man who wanted to remind someone he still had power. In the early hours, Marco and Nico met in Henry's private office, their expressions tight. The room smelled faintly of coffee and smoke, the morning sun cutting clean lines across the marble floor. Nico set down his laptop. It's worse than we thought. Henry didn't move. Show me. On the screen, financial records, police logs, and text messages blinked to life. Fragments of a network buried beneath the badge. Walker's not working alone, Nico explained. He's tied to a group of officers who've been running side jobs for years. They shake down small-time dealers, take cash, let them go. Sometimes they plant evidence to justify a raid. They've got 2 sergeants covering for them and a precinct captain looking the other way. Marco leaned forward, tapping the screen. These bank transfers match the ones from Walker's offshore accounts. Same middleman, same shell companies. Henry's gaze sharpened. So the department's protecting him. Nico nodded. And making money off him too. They clean up his mess. He keeps his mouth shut about theirs. Mutual insurance. Henry stood, pacing slowly toward the window. Below, Brooklyn stretched wide and glittering, the skyline ablaze against the pale sky. So, it isn't just him. No, Marco said quietly. It's a whole system. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of it hung in the air like smoke. Finally, Henry turned. Frank. The older man stepped from the corner where he'd been silent, arms crossed. Frank DeSantis had been with Henry since before the empire was built, a consigliere who understood both loyalty and limits. Henry's tone was calm but heavy. If I take this man down, it won't stop with him. It'll pull the whole department into the light. Frank exhaled through his nose. That's what worries me. You go after a cop, you're not fighting one man. You're fighting the system that protects him. Every favor, every badge, every judge he drinks with. You'll bring heat from places you can't see. Henry studied him for a long moment. Then we don't touch him. Frank frowned. Meaning, we let his own people do it, Henry said. Expose the rot. Make it look like justice came from inside the house. A thin smile touched Frank's lips. You always did like playing chess with fire. Henry poured a drink, the ice clinking softly. Fire cleans what the law ignores. That evening, the penthouse felt quieter than usual. The staff moved cautiously, sensing the undercurrent of tension. Sarah, however, couldn't avoid it. She had spent the day distracted, cleaning rooms twice over, forgetting small things she normally never missed. Every time she walked past a window, she felt eyes on her. Every sound from the street below made her chest tighten. When Henry finally approached her near the end of the day, she nearly dropped the vase she was polishing. Sarah. She turned quickly, heart racing. Yes, sir. He motioned for her to sit. She hesitated, then obeyed. He studied her quietly, the same way he studied people before making million-dollar decisions. You haven't been sleeping, he said. It wasn't a question. She blinked, caught off guard. I'm fine. No, Henry said softly. You're not. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice that trembled despite her effort, she confessed. He's been outside. Henry's jaw tightened. Outside where? My apartment, she whispered. Every night this week. He parks across the street and just sits there. Doesn't get out. Just waits. Ethan Walker. The name left Henry's mouth like a verdict. Sarah's eyes widened. You know, I know enough. She shook her head, panic rising. Please don't get involved. If he finds out someone's watching him, he'll... Henry interrupted, his tone quiet but final. He already crossed the line. Tears welled up in her eyes. You don't understand what he's capable of. He has connections, friends in the department. They'll protect him. Henry reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black card. There was only one number printed on it. He slid it across the counter to her. If he comes near you again, he said, call this number. Day or night. Don't wait. Don't think. Just call. Sarah looked down at the card, then back up at him. Who will answer? Someone who doesn't ask questions. She hesitated, then took it, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second. Thank you, she whispered. Henry nodded once. Go home early tonight. Hours later, long after Sarah had left, Marco walked into the office carrying a manila folder. His expression was grim. You might want to see this, boss. Henry set down his glass. What now? Marco slid the folder across the desk. Footage from tonight. The cameras your guys set up outside her building. Henry opened it and pulled out a series of still images, grainy, time-stamped shots taken from across the street. In one frame, Sarah stood outside her apartment, key in hand. In the next, a man stepped into view, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing plain clothes. Even in low light, the shape of his posture radiated ownership. Ethan Walker. Henry's jaw tightened as he flipped to the next image. Walker had reached for her arm. The camera had caught the moment his hand clamped down. Sarah's face turned away, her shoulders tense. It was the same grip that had left those fading bruises. Marco spoke quietly. He stayed there 5 minutes after she went inside. Drove off around 10. Henry didn't answer right away. His thumb rested on the edge of the photograph, eyes locked on the frozen image of Walker's hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, controlled, and deadly calm. Keep the footage safe. Make copies. One for me, one for the press. You thinking of making it public? Marco asked. Not yet, Henry said. Not until I've shown the right people what happens when the law hides its monsters. He rose, sliding the photos back into the folder. This isn't just about her anymore. It's about every man like him who thinks his badge makes him untouchable. Marco nodded slowly, and when the department starts asking questions, Henry's lips curved slightly. Then they can answer them on the evening news. He turned toward the window, the city's glow reflecting in his eyes. Beneath the glittering skyline, predators hunted in uniforms, and the law looked the other way. But that was about to change. Henry Barbaro had decided. The game had shifted, and somewhere in the Bronx, a man named Ethan Walker had no idea that his next mistake would be his last. By the end of the week, Henry Barbaro's world moved like a machine. Quiet, coordinated, and mercilessly efficient. Every man under his command had a task, and every task led to one goal: dismantling Ethan Walker's life, piece by piece. Henry's penthouse had become a war room. Charts, photographs, and documents filled the walls. Not the messy chaos of obsession, but the organized rhythm of strategy. Marco handled field surveillance. Nico ran digital operations, and Frank managed communication with external contacts who preferred their names to remain invisible. In one corner, Nico sat surrounded by screens. Streams of code, data trails, and bank ledgers glowed across his glasses. He's sloppier than I thought, he muttered. He thinks hiding cash through friends' accounts makes him clever, but he leaves patterns everywhere. Henry stood behind him, arms crossed. Show me. Nico pointed to one of the screens. Here, 3 different accounts, same timestamps. 10 grand cash deposits every other Friday. The money comes in from shell companies tied to narcotic seizures that never made it to the evidence locker. Walker's team confiscates the cash, schemes it, and launders it through fake charity groups. It's practically a business. Marco leaned in, shaking his head. And there's supposed to be the law. Henry's tone was cold. The law is just another weapon. It depends on who's holding it. He moved closer to the table, studying the board where photos of Ethan's associates hung. How many of them? 7 that we can confirm, Nico said. Maybe 10 total. Walker's their middleman. He handles the payoffs, collects the hush money, and distributes it up the chain. Henry nodded slowly. So he's not just corrupt. He's the artery that feeds the corruption. Nico looked up. What do you want to do with it all? Henry turned toward the window. The city stretched out before him, vast and indifferent. We use it. Frank's voice came from behind him. Use it how? Leaks, Henry said. Anonymous tips. Blog posts. Journalists who like to play hero. Give them a story that burns bright enough to blind the people protecting him. Frank frowned. You're talking about blowing this open? Public exposure? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Frank stepped closer, his voice low but firm. If this goes public, we can't control where it lands. These aren't gangsters you're dealing with, Henry. These are cops, politicians, bureaucrats. They'll start pulling strings we don't even see. You could light up the whole department. Henry's expression didn't change. Then maybe it's time the city saw what its protectors really look like. Justice has rules, Frank said. Henry poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the light. We're not hiding from justice, he said quietly. We're forcing it to look. Frank sighed, realizing there was no turning him. Then we'd better make sure it doesn't look back. The next 48 hours moved with surgical precision. Nico built encrypted trails for the leaks, data packets that appeared to come from whistleblowers inside the NYPD. Anonymous emails went out to investigative journalists, watchdog forums, and anti-corruption groups. Each message contained a piece of the puzzle: financial records, photographs, timestamps, and digital trails linking Ethan Walker to dirty cops and dirty money. Marco's team provided the physical proof: surveillance photos, security footage, and testimony from dealers who'd paid Walker to stay out of jail. It was a full-scale operation disguised as coincidence. Henry oversaw it all from his office, the calm center of the storm he'd created. At times, he thought of Sarah, not the terrified woman who once flinched at shadows, but the one he'd seen laughing quietly with Mrs. Leone in the kitchen 2 days ago. There had been a lightness in her voice he hadn't heard before. For the first time, she seemed to believe she could breathe without fear. She didn't know the reason yet. She didn't know that the man who'd haunted her was being dismantled piece by piece in the same building where she worked. That evening, as Sarah left for the night, she paused at the balcony door for a moment, watching the city below. The air felt strange, not calm, not chaotic, just heavy, like the moments before a thunderstorm. She couldn't explain it, but she felt something shifting. Inside, Frank joined Henry by the window, watching her go. "She's getting stronger," he said quietly. Henry nodded. "She deserves peace. Peace is fragile in your line of work." Henry glanced sideways at him. "Then we protect it." Frank studied him for a moment. "You're changing, Henry." "No," Henry said. "I'm remembering." By the third day, the leaks began to ripple outward. A blog post appeared first. Anonymous source claims NYPD detective involved in corruption ring. Within hours, a local journalist picked it up, cross-referencing financial records from a leak. Then came the social media chatter, the screenshots, the speculation. Nico sat in the office, grinning faintly as he monitored the spread. They're eating it up. Every outlet's calling it a scandal in the making. Nobody knows where it's coming from. Marco smirked. "They will soon." Henry didn't smile. He simply said, "Good." For him, this wasn't about headlines. It was about exposure. Ethan Walker had built his power on the illusion of untouchability. Henry's goal was to strip that illusion bare for everyone to see. Late that night, as the last of the files were sent, Henry stood alone in his office, looking out at Brooklyn's sleepless skyline. He thought of the first time he'd seen Sarah's bruises, how her voice had trembled when she'd said she was just clumsy. No, he thought, you weren't clumsy. You were trapped. And now, so is the man who trapped you. Across the city, Ethan Walker sat in his unmarked car, parked outside a bar he used to frequent. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale. The phone on the passenger seat buzzed again. Another call from his precinct. He didn't answer. The air inside the car felt tight, suffocating. His gut told him something was wrong. Someone had been asking questions. A friend at Internal Affairs had hinted that his name had come up in a conversation it shouldn't have. Ethan looked around the empty street, his jaw clenched. For the first time in a long time, he felt hunted. He didn't know who was behind it. He didn't know how deep it went. But he could feel the walls closing in. And far above the city, in a penthouse bathed in quiet light, Henry Barbaro watched it all unfold with the patience of a man who knew exactly when to strike. At exactly 6 o'clock on Friday morning, Brooklyn woke to chaos. Every television, news feed, and radio station carried the same headline in bold, unmissable letters. Brooklyn detective under investigation for corruption and abuse. By 6:05, Ethan Walker's photograph was everywhere. The polished detective smile that once won him commendations now looked like the face of deceit, cold, arrogant, and suddenly powerless. Reporters tore through his background, his awards, his connections, his supposed heroics. Every piece of his carefully crafted image was now fuel for the fire. The leaks Henry's team had released had landed exactly where he wanted them to. Financial records, screenshots, surveillance photos, audio clips, all perfectly timed, perfectly sourced. Within an hour, Internal Affairs had launched an emergency inquiry. Ethan's badge was suspended by noon, and his gun was confiscated pending investigation. The city buzzed with outrage. Talk shows debated corruption in the NYPD. Social media exploded with commentary. Some called him a disgrace. Others whispered that he wasn't the only one. By the end of the day, anonymous tips poured into journalists' inboxes from other officers and women who claimed to have suffered under Ethan's so-called authority. The system that once protected him was now crumbling piece by piece. At the Barbaro penthouse, sunlight spilled over the marble floors as Sarah entered the kitchen, still half asleep. She reached for the radio like she did every morning, expecting to hear jazz or the weather. Instead, a newscaster's voice filled the air. Detective Ethan Walker of the NYPD is under federal review after explosive evidence linked him to a string of bribery, assault, and corruption cases stretching over 6 years. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. She turned toward the small television on the counter, the one Mrs. Leone kept on for morning shows. Ethan's face stared back at her from the screen, framed by flashing words. Corruption scandal rocks NYPD. The sound faded beneath the pounding of her heartbeat. Her hand went to her mouth as tears blurred her vision. She stumbled back against the counter, shaking her head as if the image might disappear. The anchors continued, detailing his suspension, the investigation, the evidence, all of it public, all of it undeniable. Sarah's knees gave out. She slid down to the floor, sobbing silently into her hands. For years, she'd imagined this moment, a day when someone might finally see him for who he truly was, but she never believed it would come. Ethan Walker had always been untouchable, the man who wore a badge like a crown. Now, his empire of fear was crumbling live on national television. Henry stood in the doorway, watching her. He hadn't planned to walk in just yet, but the moment had frozen him too. Sarah, shaking on the kitchen floor, the television glowing with the face of the man who'd hurt her. He didn't move closer, didn't interrupt. He knew this wasn't a moment that needed words. When she finally looked up and saw him, her eyes were red, her cheeks wet. "Is this real?" she whispered. Henry's voice was low, steady. "It's real." Her gaze drifted back to the screen. "Ow!" He stepped forward, just enough for his reflection to join hers in the stainless steel refrigerator. "The truth has a way of finding its way out," he said quietly. She tried to speak again, but couldn't. Her voice broke, caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. He leaned against the counter beside her, watching the news continue. Reporters were now standing outside the precinct. Cameras flashed as Ethan, head down, was escorted past the press, his uniform stripped of rank and dignity. Henry's expression barely changed, but something flickered behind his eyes, a faint glimmer of satisfaction shadowed by calm resolve. He said only one thing, barely above a whisper. Now the city sees him for what he is. By late afternoon, the fallout spread faster than anyone could contain it. The NYPD issued statements denying knowledge of the corruption. City Hall distanced itself from Walker, claiming to have zero tolerance for misconduct. But the public didn't buy it. Hashtags trended, headlines multiplied, and television crews camped outside Ethan's apartment. Nico kept Henry updated from his office, scrolling through live feeds. "Every outlet's running the story nonstop," he said, shaking his head. "It's spreading faster than we predicted. Even federal agencies are paying attention now." Frank leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You sure you want this kind of noise? It's going to shake the whole department." Henry glanced over. "Good. Maybe it needs shaking." Marco entered a few minutes later, holding his phone. "It's done," he said. "Every trace we left looks clean. No connection to us. No one could trace the leaks." Henry nodded approvingly. "Then we wait." By evening, Sarah hadn't said much. She stayed busy in the kitchen, her movements slow but deliberate, as though keeping herself occupied was the only way to process what was happening. Mrs. Leone tried to comfort her, but Sarah simply smiled through her tears. "I never thought I'd see this day," she murmured. "I never thought he'd be the one hiding." "Justice finds everyone eventually," Mrs. Leone said softly. Sarah looked toward the penthouse balcony, where Henry now stood, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was calm but clipped. "Say that again." On the other end, Marco's tone was grim. "Walker's gone. He walked out of his precinct an hour ago. Left his car, his badge, everything. Nobody knows where he went." Henry's gaze shifted toward the skyline, the city glowing under the setting sun. "He won't disappear," he said finally. "Men like him don't vanish. They hunt." He ended the call, sliding the phone into his pocket. Inside, the laughter of a television audience from some unrelated show echoed faintly through the penthouse, a strange contrast to the storm that had just begun to brew. Henry stayed on the balcony, his reflection ghosted in the glass. Below him, the city pulsed, restless, watching, waiting. Somewhere out there, Ethan Walker was moving, desperate and dangerous. And for the first time in days, Henry felt the faint stirrings of unease. He whispered to himself, barely audible over the hum of the city, "Let's see what a cornered animal does next." By Saturday night, Ethan Walker had become a ghost in his own city. His face still filled television screens and news feeds, but the man himself was unrecognizable, unshaven, wild-eyed, his tie loosened and shirt stained with whiskey. The confident detective who once walked precinct halls like a king now sat slumped behind the wheel of a beat-up sedan parked in an alley near the river, a bottle on the seat beside him. He muttered to himself as the city lights blurred beyond the windshield. "They set me up. That's what this is." His hand gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. "She did this. That girl, that Maid. She opened her mouth." He slammed his fist against the dashboard, the sound sharp in the silence. "After everything I did for her." But even he couldn't finish the lie. Deep down, Ethan knew he'd built this disaster himself. Still, he needed someone to blame. And blaming her was easier than facing what he'd become. He took another swallow from the bottle and started the car. Across the river, Henry Barbaro was already expecting him. Not literally, but instinctively. He knew men like Ethan. When cornered, they didn't flee. They circled back toward what they'd lost. In his penthouse office, the low hum of the city filled the silence as Henry stood with Frank and Marco, reviewing a new layer of precautions. "Two men on the corner of Sarah's block, one across the street," Henry said, pointing to the map laid out on his desk. "Unmarked car with a clear view of the entrance. Nobody leaves or enters without our eyes on them." Frank adjusted his glasses, scanning the layout. "What about the building itself?" "Already covered," Marco replied. "Her landlord's cooperating. Cameras in the lobby and stairwell. Feed goes directly to Nico's system." Henry nodded. "And the cops?" "Two plainclothes officers we trust," Frank said. "They owe us favors. They'll stay quiet unless something happens." Henry leaned back slightly, his tone calm but absolute. "If he shows up, he doesn't get within 10 feet of her door." Marco hesitated. "You think he'll really come?" Henry's gaze hardened. Men like him only understand control. When it's taken from them, they come back to take it. Meanwhile, Sarah was home in her small Bronx apartment. She sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, the glow from the streetlights spilling across her face. Every creak in the hallway made her flinch. Every car engine outside made her glance through the blinds. The TV was on, but muted, tuned to yet another news report about Ethan's investigation. His face appeared again and again. The same arrogant smirk, the same eyes that once made her blood run cold. Her phone buzzed on the table. "Henry Barbaro." She hesitated before answering. "Mr. Barbaro?" "Henry," he corrected. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she lied softly. "Just tired." "Don't lie to me, Sarah," he said gently. "You're safe, but I know that doesn't mean you feel safe." There was a pause on her end. She looked around the apartment, her hand tightening around the phone. "You really think he won't come?" Henry's voice was steady, unwavering. "If he does, he won't get close. You have my word." The promise carried weight, not from its words but from the man behind them. She believed him, even if she didn't understand why. "Try to rest," he said. "You're not alone in this anymore." When the call ended, Sarah sat in silence, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. It had been years since anyone had said those words to her. Ethan's car turned onto her street an hour later. The Bronx was quieter at night, but not tonight. Patrol cars rolled through the distance, and streetlights flickered weakly against the damp pavement. He parked half a block away, engine idling, eyes locked on the small apartment building at the corner. The window lights on the third floor told him exactly where she was. His hand twitched toward the glove compartment where his off-duty gun used to sit. It wasn't there anymore. The NYPD had taken it, along with his badge and his pride. But rage was its own weapon, and he had plenty of that left. He stepped out of the car, swaying slightly from the alcohol. His voice cracked in the cold night air. "You think you could destroy me, Sarah? You think you could just walk away?" A man smoking on the corner turned to look. Ethan barked, "Mind your business." The man hurried off without another word. Ethan started walking toward the building, muttering to himself, "She'll see me. She'll understand. She'll apologize. She has to." His steps were uneven, his breathing heavy. He didn't notice the unmarked car parked across the street, or the two men inside, quietly speaking into radios. Up in her apartment, Sarah's pulse spiked. She had seen movement outside her window, a figure she knew too well. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone Henry had given her, the one with a single number saved under the name Private Line. She pressed it. It rang once. "Henry," she whispered. He was already awake, sitting in his office with the phone in hand. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Her voice shook. "He's here." There was a sharp inhale on the other end, followed by silence. Then Henry's tone turned to iron. "Lock your door. Stay away from the windows." Her heart hammered. "He's outside the building. What if—" "Sarah," Henry interrupted, calm but absolute. "It's over." He hung up and turned to Marco, who was already moving before Henry spoke. "Get the team in place," Henry said. "Now!" Outside, Ethan stood across the street, staring up at the third-floor window glowing faintly above him. His breath came in ragged bursts, his thoughts spinning out of control. Somewhere nearby, engine started, quiet, coordinated. But Ethan didn't notice the shadows moving closer, the two men who stepped from the unmarked car, speaking softly into their earpieces. He only saw that window, that light, that ghost of a life he thought he owned. And as he took one step toward the building, the sound of approaching tires echoed down the street. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable. The hunt was over. Saturday evening came heavy with rain. The streets of the Bronx shimmered under the glow of streetlights, the wet pavement reflecting every flash of red and yellow from passing cars. Somewhere in that quiet storm, Ethan Walker's last ounce of reason snapped. He was done hiding, done running. In his mind, it was all her fault, Sarah's fault. She turned on him, embarrassed him, ruined him. Now every whisper in every bar carried his name like a curse. By the time he reached her apartment building, he was trembling with fury. His voice was raw from shouting at no one during the drive. When he stepped out of the car, the bottle he'd been drinking from hit the curb and shattered, spilling dark liquid that mixed with the rain. He marched toward the entrance, slamming his fist on the door buzzer. "Sarah," he shouted, the sound echoing through the building. "You think you can hide from me?" Upstairs, Sarah froze. The sound of his voice hit her like a physical blow. Familiar, cruel, unforgettable. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the kitchen floor. She scrambled for it, pressing Henry's private number. Her breath came fast, sharp. "Henry," she whispered when he answered. "He's here again. He's outside." Henry was already standing. His tone was quiet but fierce. "Lock the door. Don't say a word to him. Help's already on the way." Outside, two unmarked cars turned the corner, tires slicing through puddles. Inside them, Henry's men moved in silence, trained, focused, coordinated. They'd been on standby since morning, waiting for exactly this moment. Nico's voice came through one of their earpieces. Confirmed visual. "He's at the front door. Frank says the restraining order went through this morning. Clean and legal." Marco, sitting in the lead car, gave the order. "Hold position until he escalates. We want this on record." It didn't take long. Ethan began pounding the door again, harder this time, his voice rising with every hit. "You think you can run to him?" You think that gangster can protect you from me? He kicked the door once, twice, each blow louder than the last. Inside, Sarah sat against the wall, clutching the phone to her chest. She could hear him just outside, the wood rattling with every strike. Her entire body shook, but she didn't move. Henry's voice echoed in her mind. You're not alone anymore. Then the pounding stopped. Silence. A heartbeat later, the door frame cracked. Ethan shouted again, louder, hoarser. You think this is over? I made you. You were nothing before me. The door gave way just an inch before heavy footsteps filled the stairwell. Police. Step back from the door. Ethan spun toward the sound, blinded by the sudden flood of flashlights. 4 men stormed the hallway. 2 of Henry's men in civilian clothes and 2 detectives from Frank's trusted list. For a split second, Ethan hesitated, confusion flashing across his face. Who the hell are you? Get on your knees, one of the detectives ordered, weapon drawn but steady. Ethan's jaw clenched. You don't have the right. The detective flashed a folded paper. Restraining order, signed this morning. You're in violation. Step back now. Ethan lunged instead, shoving one of them aside and reaching for the half-open apartment door. But before he could take another step, Marco hit him from behind, slamming him to the wall. Easy, Marco said through gritted teeth. You don't want to make this worse. Ethan struggled, roaring like a cornered animal. She set me up. You're all in on it. I'm being framed. Rain and sweat mixed on his face as he thrashed, but within seconds, they had him restrained. Cuffs clicked around his wrists. The fight drained from him in uneven bursts of rage and exhaustion. Outside, sirens approached, not by accident. Henry had made sure the right people knew exactly where to be and when. By the time Ethan was dragged down the front steps, the street was alive with flashing lights. News vans had arrived, cameras already rolling. Reporters shouted questions over the noise. Detective Walker, are the corruption allegations true? Is it connected to the domestic abuse case? Did you assault your ex-wife? He twisted against his captors, his voice breaking. You don't know the truth. She's lying. They're all lying. But no one was listening anymore. The cameras had captured what mattered. The disgraced detective, in cuffs, screaming in the rain. To the watching city, it was the perfect ending to a scandal that had consumed headlines all week. The predator had fallen. From the penthouse balcony overlooking Brooklyn, Henry Barbaro watched the live feed in silence. The television cast a faint blue light across the room, reflecting in his eyes. On screen, Ethan Walker was shoved into the back of a police cruiser, his shouts muffled by the downpour. Reporters' microphones filled the frame like a wall closing in. Henry's drink sat untouched on the table beside him. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He just watched. Frank entered quietly, stopping a few feet away. It's done, he said. He'll face federal charges. Assault, bribery, obstruction, the whole list. Henry didn't turn from the window. No one's untouchable, he murmured. Not even us, Frank replied carefully. Henry's gaze stayed on the screen a moment longer before he finally looked away. That's the difference, he said. We know what we are. The rain outside began to ease, the sound softening against the glass. Down in the Bronx, Sarah stood at her window, watching the last of the police cars disappear down the street. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt earned. She exhaled, a single tear slipping free. Not from fear this time, but release. Somewhere, justice had been done, even if it didn't wear a badge. And miles away, Henry turned off the television. The screen went black, but his reflection lingered in it, still unreadable and quietly satisfied. Monday morning arrived with sunlight. It poured through the high-rise windows of Brooklyn's skyline, spilling over streets lined with newspapers, each one bearing the same headline. Corrupt officer arrested in domestic abuse and bribery scandal. The story dominated every front page, every talk show, every online feed. Ethan Walker's mugshot stared out at the city he once policed. The dark circles under his eyes, the defiance gone from his face. It was the image of a man stripped of every illusion of power. Inside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Federal prosecutors had filed multiple charges, corruption, assault, extortion, obstruction of justice. His lawyers tried to paint him as the victim of a setup, but no one believed it. Not anymore. By noon, his allies had begun to scatter. Officers who once shook his hand refused to speak his name. City Hall denied any connection. Even his uncle, Deputy Commissioner Harold Walker, announced his resignation for health reasons. The empire Ethan built on fear had collapsed in 3 days. And the man who once hid behind his badge now stood alone before a federal judge, wearing handcuffs instead of authority. At the Barbaro estate, the world moved slower. The scent of coffee filled the penthouse kitchen as Sarah Antonio walked in, her posture different now, straighter, lighter, unburdened. For the first time since she'd arrived months ago, she wasn't hiding behind long sleeves or lowered eyes. The bruises had faded, but something deeper had healed too. Mrs. Leone greeted her with a warm smile. "You look rested." Sarah smiled faintly, glancing toward the window. "I slept through the night." "That's new. Peace looks good on you, dear." Sarah nodded. "It feels strange. Like I forgot what it was." From the other side of the kitchen, Henry's voice broke the quiet. "You'll get used to it." He stood by the doorway, still in his dark suit, the morning paper folded neatly in his hand. The light caught the edges of his silver cufflinks, the kind he wore when business required authority. Sarah turned toward him, her voice soft but certain. "You did this, didn't you?" Henry raised an eyebrow. "Did what?" She stepped closer, searching his face. "Made sure he paid for what he did." He didn't answer immediately. He placed a folded newspaper on the counter instead, the front page headline visible between them. Ethan's face, defeated and small, stared up from the page. "Justice has its own way of showing up," Henry said finally. "Sometimes it just needs a little direction." Sarah let out a small, unsteady laugh, part disbelief, part relief. "You make it sound simple." He shrugged slightly. "It should be." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city below filled the silence between them. Then Sarah took a breath and said, "Thank you, Mr. Barbaro, for everything." He shook his head. "You don't thank me for doing what's right." His voice softened. "You just live free." She looked at him, the man whose reputation could freeze a room, now speaking like someone who'd carried too many ghosts. "I don't know how to do that yet," she admitted. "Start with breathing," Henry said. "The rest comes after." Later that morning, Sarah stood near the penthouse windows, the same spot where she once felt small and invisible. The view stretched endlessly, the river, the skyline, the sun reflecting off the glass towers of Manhattan. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped by it. She felt part of it. Her reflection stared back at her, not the frightened maid she used to be, but a woman rediscovering herself. Henry stood a few paces behind her, watching silently. "You ever think about leaving all this?" she asked without turning around. "Every day," he said. "Then why don't you?" He smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. "Because the city doesn't change just because you walk away. Someone has to keep balance, even if it's in the shadows." Sarah turned to face him. "That sounds lonely." "It is," he admitted, "but it's honest." They stood there for a moment, sunlight painting the floor between them. Then Sarah nodded slowly, a quiet understanding passing between them. "I think I'm going to visit my sister," she said. "Maybe stay a while." Henry nodded. "Good. You deserve that." She smiled, a small, genuine thing. "Will you be all right here?" He looked past her, out toward the city. "Brooklyn always keeps me busy." As Sarah gathered her things later that day, Mrs. Leone hugged her tightly. "You come back and visit. You hear me?" "I will," Sarah promised. When she stepped out of the penthouse, the elevator doors closed behind her with a quiet finality. Henry remained by the window, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the skyline. The city was waking again, sirens in the distance, horns, the rhythm of another day. On the counter beside him, his phone began to ring. The display showed a number he recognized, one of his lieutenants. He let it ring twice before answering. "Talk to me," he said simply. A pause on the other end, then, "We got a problem down at Pier 47. Henry exhaled slowly, the faintest trace of weariness in his voice. "There's always a problem." He ended the call and looked once more toward the city. The sunlight had shifted, breaking through clouds in sharp, golden lines. For a moment, it painted him in light, a man caught between redemption and ruin. Then the light moved on, leaving only his reflection in the glass, sharp, unreadable, and unbowed. Down in the lobby, Sarah stepped onto the sidewalk. The wind caught her hair, lifting it slightly as she looked back toward the towering building. She didn't see Henry in the window, but she didn't need to. She smiled to herself, whispered a quiet goodbye, and began walking toward the subway, toward a life that, for once, was hers alone. Above her, the city roared and pulsed with its usual chaos. But for a brief moment, amidst the noise, there was calm. And somewhere in the penthouse high above, Henry Barbaro stood watching the horizon, the faintest whisper escaping his lips. "The city forgets fast," he said, "but it remembers one thing. You can cross the law, but never cross my house."
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you are watching from.